What are common and preferred shares? Well, let me address each of them individually and the key factors. So we'll look at what are they, why do you have them, when do you authorize them, and how do you go about doing that. So common shares are the common form of ownership unit for a corporation. In fact, ownership units are required under most state laws for corporate business entities, and these units are known as shares, so shares of stock. And there has to be at least one class of stock. This is generally what we call a common share of stock because it's common to all shareholders. So this is what it is. It's a required unit of ownership for a corporation. Why do you have them? Well, based upon the nature of how a corporation is organized, the ability to separate the owners, shareholders, from the decision makers, that is the directors on the board of directors, and then the daily operations managers, the executives, and the pyramid that falls under them, it is important to have a measurable unit of ownership that can easily be transferred, exchanged, and quantified when it comes to percentage or fractional ownership of the entity. So that's why you have them. When do you authorize or create these shares? Well, when you are forming the corporation, you state in the articles of incorporation how many shares of the company you are going to create. This is known as the number of authorized shares of the company. Now, authorized does not mean that all of these shares are or have to be distributed at that point in time. It just means that they are authorized under the governance documents. So if the board of directors elects to do so and the shareholders approve it, shares of that number can be distributed. So that ultimately is when you do it and how you do it. It's when you're forming the corporation. Now, later on, you can restate and amend the articles of organization to authorize more shares or additional shares. This happens during stock splits, it happens during financing, and things like that. So this is generally how common shares arise. Now, on the other side, preferred shares. This is another class of shares. It is preferred to the common shares. And preferred simply means it has rights that are different than the common shares. These are select rights that are generally bundled into a specific type of stock or share that investors want in exchange for investing in the company. So if I form a corporation and I've created 1,000 common shares and that's distributed to the founders, but then an investor wants to purchase an interest in the company, we need the money to grow, so we agree to it. We will then grant specific rights to that investor, generally as an owner of the company, and we'll do it through preferred shares. So we will then have to go back to the articles of organization, we'll have to amend and restate them, and we'll have to identify the preferred shares that are now authorized. And this adding of additional shares, even though it's a separate class, even though it's preferred versus common, it still increases the total number of shares and thus dilutes the ownership interest or percentage of ownership of other already existing shareholders. So we can now distribute these preferred shares to shareholders. These preferred shares may have specific voting rights, specific information rights, specific rights to priority of payment of dividends, or if the company's sold, a liquidation preference, that is the amount of money invested is returned to them, or some multiple of that is returned to them in advance, redemption rights, tag-along rights if the shares are being sold by the company or others in the company are selling their rights, registration rights, the ability to register the company for public sale of the interest, conversion rights, the ability to convert the shares into common shares. The list goes on, but there are so many different special rights that you can put in these preferred shares. But again, how do you do it? You're going to have to go back and restate in the articles of organization the existence of these preferred shares. Then you're going to define the characteristics of these preferred shares in the bylaws, and oftentimes you'll have even a separate agreement, which is an investor's rights agreement, that further outlines the specific rights of this group of investors or this class of individual who are holding the preferred shares. And so this is what are common and preferred shares and generally how they're used in a business venture.